Welcome to the show. In this one, I have a conversation with Chef Laura Cole. Laura grew up with a strong sense of duty to community and a refined palate. Both were instilled in her by her parents and continue to influence her taste and her actions to this day. In 2019, Laura was a contestant on Top Chef, an experience that she says gave her some of her closest friends. Today, she splits her seasons between her restaurant near Denali National Park called 229 Restaurant and Tavern, and Muse, the restaurant at the Anchorage Museum. She says that in all her professional endeavors, she has a mantra, which is to nourish and nurture all those who come to our table. Okay, time to give the Crude Company men a shout out. These are the people who have subscribed to the Crude Patreon for $50 or more. Trina Duber, Seward Brewing Company, The Grind Coffee Shop in Juneau, Derek Adolph, Blue and Gold Board Shop, Sharon Liska, and Alaska Surf Adventure. Thank you to all the Patreon subscribers. This podcast wouldn't be possible without you. If you subscribe to the Crude Magazine Patreon, thank you. Your money helps keep these conversations going. So if you enjoy these conversations, you can subscribe at www.patreon.com/Crude Magazine. That's patreon.com/Crude Magazine. And pick the subscription tier that works for you. Okay, back to Laura Cole. When Laura talks about food, she talks about it in relation to memories. How a certain food or meal can leave an indelible impression. How a good meal with good company and good conversation can be remembered forever. Laura calls these food memories, and she's constantly trying to create them. So here she is, Laura Cole. This red light right here, it means we're recording.
Okay, fired up.
Crude conversations. Listen more, then you talk.
Go to work!
Can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Loud and clear. Okay, perfect. Welcome to the show, Laura.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
So, since I know we'll be talking about cooking, I wanted to start this conversation off by telling you that I don't cook that often.
A lot of people don't.
And that generally I just eat a lot of sandwiches.
Who doesn't love a sandwich?
Do you have a favorite sandwich?
Like endlessly, anything can be in a sandwich. And the one thing that I've been working with recently is reindeer heart. And I make reindeer heart pastrami. And I make it like a big mile-high New York reindeer heart pastrami sandwich.
How did it come to be that you started making a reindeer heart pastrami sandwich?
I have a portion of a reindeer herd in northern Alaska, and I do whole animal slaughters, and I like to use the whole animal. So I make reindeer liver pate, and I use the organ meat to make hot dogs, and I had all these hearts, and I just thought it would be a great, because it's so tough, it's just all muscle, to make it pastrami style. So it sits in a basically like a 2-week pastrami brine, and then we cook it off and shave it really thin, and it's an Alaskan pastrami sandwich.
These hearts that you said you had a lot of, are they just in like a tub?
No, I get 1 heart per slaughter.
Oh, I see.
and I freeze them until I have enough to like qualify making something with the organ meat. So like, you know, reindeers themselves have a hanging weight of about, anywhere between 200 and like 380 pounds. And these are older animal slaughters, and not all the organ meat gets USDA approved because sometimes there's contaminants and it's a very strict approval process. But then once you get the organ meat, I feel it's my job to make sure I qualify that animal and utilize everything.
That's great.
It's delicious. You should try one.
I would love to try one. So are caribou and reindeer the same animal, but one is just domesticated? Or
That's exactly right. And you cannot serve wild game just anywhere. But you have to have anything I serve commercially has to be USDA inspected. So it has to be the difference between the wild to domesticated animal.
Okay.
But it's actually the only real sustainable animal, like large mammal for Alaska to like herd and breed versus, I mean, you can do lamb and sheep and pig, but cattle won't sustain in the state. Just it's too cold, the rest of it. But like caribou and then the, manipulation to the reindeer works perfectly for the state, for the impact, the environmental impacts, for the herding qualities, for the atmosphere, for everything. And so it's a shame that there isn't a bigger push to develop more of that as a natural resource for our state.
Alaska is unique in that way where we have, like you said, you have to have like these cold weather animals that are sustainable. You being a chef and using that meat, I'm sure you've learned a lot about Alaskan animals.
This is an environment that we're lucky to have and be a part of, and to be able to sustain and help further the conversation of the food web and footprint for what it means to have like an economic base, like a natural base, a nourishing base. Here in the state, the footprint is enormous, but it's farm to table, and I don't mean that in cliche ways. I mean that I get my greens down on the mail truck from Fairbanks to Denali, and then the excess greens I bring from Denali back to Anchorage. And I work with foragers and farmers and ranchers and fishermen. And it's about telling the story of what our state has to provide without the added enhancements of antibiotics, chemicals, any of the negative impacts that the food industry has had in the lower 48.
That's interesting. I always like thinking of food and meals as like they're more important than just sustenance, right? It's where the food came from, as well as like what a meal represents, with family, with friends. I mean, do you have any like personal philosophies about food?
Our mission statement for all of my organizations and everybody that works with me is to nourish and nurture all those who come to our table. And that means purveyors, that means fishermen, that means ranchers, that means customers, that means employees. It's to nourish and nurture. And in this state right now, we have one of the most extraordinary gifts ever because our waters are not polluted. Our ground is not just festered with antibiotics and like horrible chemicals to like produce a bigger growing season. And with everything that's going on with like different growth seasons, different like fishery seasons, the whole thing, the dynamics of what we're looking at in the state are pretty incredible. But we also rely so heavily on the lower 48 for everything. And we've come so far away from the day where people kept caches. People don't even know what caches are anymore. And to grab the bounty of the state and make sure that you can sustain yourself through the winter. I mean, the roadkill list, people are still like gobsmacked about that. That's a reality. But, it is a reality. And that's how a lot of people in the interior survive in the winter.
The roadkill list?
Yeah. So that's for moose and caribou that are on the road. And you just sign up with the state troopers. And if there's a kill near you, then they call you and you can harvest the meat. And you can feed your dog team, you can feed your community, you can feed your family, it depends on. And then there's so many kills on the road right now. I mean, I regret to say this, I get a little bougie about it. I'm like, well, if it's like not the right temperature and not right outside my door, I'm not going to go get that animal. But it's such a brilliant like gift back, and you don't necessarily have to be a hunter. You don't have to, but you can still provide so much in so many ways. You can't serve that commercially, which is fine. And then that translates though into the fact that whatever meat you're harvesting from that becomes the healthiest meat that you're going to put in your body because it doesn't have any chemicals, any antibiotics, any stimulants to grow the muscle tone faster or that sort of thing. And then it's just eating the elements that are around you within spruce and branches and the rest of it. And then to translate that into what we can actually sustain as a herd animal here, that sort of thing, it's still eating the same stuff. It's still part of the same picture. It's a bigger circle. And a lot of people don't think about all those choices, but it also goes back to what you were saying. It's the fisherman's family that he's going home to or she's going home to. And they're having their, family tradition or their, school night supper or whatever. And whatever impact you had to make the choice to purchase that over something else that might be commercially fished or farm fished in the lower 48, you're enhancing what is going to become the dialogue of this whole state for forever. And it's really important. I always say vote with your fork. It's a really important thing to think about.
Okay, so I have two questions now. The first one is, since you just mentioned it, can you explain vote with your fork a little bit more?
Just every day you make decisions across the board, and everybody can own their decisions. You can decide, yes, I really, really am craving this McDonald's hamburger and and that's what I want, so I'm going to get it. Or you can say, I really want to make a bigger impact and I'm going to source out something local and I'm going to make something different with that. And there's nothing wrong with one decision or the other, but you should, for me, because I'm a chef and I'm in the culinary industry and I really am passionate about that those are the choices that I make and that I try and help educate people on thinking a little bit before they're at, Fred Meyer's buying a, thing of commercially raised lettuce that might look really appealing to you, but it's coming from Mexico and it's traveled, the environmental impact of it, and then the cost impact of it, and the rest of it doesn't reflect back into somebody having a better lifestyle and you having a better quality product in your body that makes you feel healthier versus eating a parsnip that might be, from the fall harvest and it's winter and it's a little wilted or whatever. And, but you're going to get more nutrients. You're going to have a bigger impact with that. And so when I say vote with your fork, make your choices, especially when you're everybody likes to talk a big game about being involved or being, and the talk is great. And the process for that dialogue is amazing. And then it comes down to what decisions are you actually making that enforce beyond the conversation.
Mm-hmm. So voting with your fork, the thing that comes to mind is that getting the local stuff is generally going to be more expensive, right?
It should be, because you're supporting a different infrastructure and lifestyle. And you're also putting better things into your body, but also creating a better community around you to be able to help support and create a lifestyle that farmers and ranchers and fishermen can all live off of. And then it's not about how many dollars you have in the bank. It's about how great a community you're able to build.
How would you convince somebody who is living kind of paycheck to paycheck, shopping at Walmart, to go to the farmer's market instead?
Well, I mean, in all honesty, I would say there's a bunch of things I would say, but I've done a lot of work for the Welfare to Work program and single dish meals that you make on Sundays and freeze for the week, shopping on food stamps, just making some better choices. And it doesn't mean you have to go whole table all the time, but be conscious and conscientious about the decisions you're making and try and enhance some of that to translate back into building community. And if you go to the farmer's market at the end of the day, none of those people want to bring that stuff back, and none of the farmers want to take their wares back to their farm and not sell them. And so at the end of the day is you might not get the prime, you might not get the best picks, but you can. And I always tell people before they leave town, I'll take whatever you have left. I want everybody to shop as much as they can. And then before you leave, I'll take whatever you have left.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have a really open door philosophy in my kitchens that if you're interested at all, just stop by. You can come by with a bushel of stuff and be like, I don't know what to do with this. And we'll help you make something out of it.
So somebody could come to
Muse.
Yeah. At the museum or your restaurant in Denali.
Yeah.
And just drop vegetables or whatever off.
No, they would have to participate in the processing.
Okay.
But like if for me to purchase, yeah, all the
Okay.
time. Yeah, I take everything all the time.
Okay.
But if you're shopping for yourself or you're trying to shop on a budget and make some different, ethical and conscientious decisions, but you don't know what to do with it because a lot of people don't know what to do with it. I mean, just like you said, you don't cook very often. And so there's somebody that gives you a couple stalks of Brussels sprouts. What are you going to do? You don't know what to do. You don't want to waste that. Just stop on by. I'll help you make something.
You mean like if I brought you ingredients, you'd help me cook it?
Yeah.
That is amazing. I might have to take you up on that.
I tell it to people all the time. It's an open door.
That's great. So when you're not working, what kind of meals do you cook for yourself?
People will find this really funny because I work all the time. And it's also my like safety zone. It's my haven. I love kitchens and I love working. And so when I'm not working, I tend to eat not a lot. I make a lot of popcorn. I make different butters. I take like the crab shells and then I boil them down into butter. So I have crab butter and then I make like crab butter popcorn, or I make a lot of popcorn. And I do the same thing with, I make a lot of soup because I can pull it out whenever and it's a quick grab and go.
Okay.
I drive a lot between Anchorage and Denali. And so road snacks have kind of been that's the time where I'm not in between two destinations and where I'm like, I should eat something. Artichokes do not make a good road snack.
Why is that?
It's impossible to eat. And for some reason, I'm horribly attracted to artichokes. And so then I have like a whole artichoke and like a dipping sauce and I'm trying to eat it and dry. It's, any state troopers that might be listening, look out for my car. But legitimately, it's I nosh all the time. Like as a chef, somebody who's in the kitchen on the line all the time, I'm constantly tasting things, eating bites of things. So I don't really sit down for meals, and I get a little uncomfortable when I actually have to sit down for a meal because I feel like everybody's watching me. Like, is she going to eat this? Is it good or is it? And I think I derive all my food pleasures from creating it and tasting it and eating it on the go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I mean, everybody does. You have your senses and you talk through your senses, and food sensory has always been really important to me. And for my dad's 60th, was it 60 or 70th birthday, I created a whole menu for him just based on the food memories that he gave to me.
Oh, that's great.
And those are still influences on me. And I think about people that get to work with me or eat my food or have these, and I think maybe I'm creating a food memory for them.
My wife's family put together this cookbook a couple years back, and it is recipes passed down from, specifically my wife's grandfather and grandmother, and I'm sure, their lineage as well. But it's really cool because it's like, when you think about food, you think about like the ingredients, like you also think about the memories that came with these things. And so that's what I'm kind of thinking about with what you created.
Yeah, no, it's a very sensory experience. And I mean, I'm 47 years old. So like when you go back to thinking about like people used to have like little recipe card things in their cupboards, and they would like file through and find their little index card of their like, biscuit recipe, and they would follow it to the T. But those ingredients have changed over the years. So the salt content in butter has changed over the past 20 years. And so the recipe won't translate exactly the same. And so then people are constantly trying to like understand how to nudge this stuff back to their memory. But then they get defeated because they're like, well, I made it based on this, but it doesn't taste the way I remember it tasting. And there's a huge amount of that food sensory memory board that does not, that can't be replicated unless you actually think about and understand what you're putting into it, and that's part of where I come in to a lot of people's narrative is with my open door policy and kids and adults and whoever coming in and out of the kitchen. Like I want them to build like that narrative for themselves, and I want to be able to help them.
Wow, that's super interesting. I've never thought about the fact that salt content in butter has changed and all these different ingredients within the like these foundational ingredients, right?
Yeah.
Has completely changed. So in order to get, say, the macaroni and cheese that your mom used to make when you were 5, maybe it's impossible to recreate.
I don't think it's impossible to recreate. I think that you're going to have to like evolve that. I think it's possible to recreate off of the recipe card that you might be referring to.
Okay.
And you're going to have to evolve that to your flavor, memory, palate sense and like learn a little bit more about ingredients. I mean, certainly, cheese, alone, that's a ridiculous one to bring up because between the USDA and like pasteurization processes from now to 50 years ago to like all the cheeses in Europe or the rest of it, but even to what the cow is eating and how it's producing that milk in what production faction it's producing that milk between it, whether it's milks in the morning or the afternoon, whether that like grass is settled in its stomach or not, creates a different whole enzyme breakdown. And there's a series of great books that I buy everybody who comes into my kitchen and server staff, front of the house, whatever. It's what Einstein told his cook. And I just think that learning the science behind some of it helps demystify and empowers people to really feel like they're looking at like their plate a little differently.
Sorry, I'm so mesmerized by all this. This is really great. It's one of those things that we all eat. Humans have to eat. So it's
fuel.
Exactly.
Yes.
And so it's these things that we just don't think about. Like you mentioned McDonald's. I think I had McDonald's at least once this week, and I hate myself for it after I do it.
There's really nothing wrong with it, though. Like understanding that and there's nothing wrong with scale and operations and that sort of thing. But it's just understanding the choices and decisions you make. Are you getting that for quick substance and fuel? And, especially chains like McDonald's or whatever, they have mastered fast food to a point where they're providing a level of nutrition, a level of safety, a level of sanitation at a low dollar point for like a quick nutritional fix. I am not saying there's anything wrong with that at all. I just think that I'm driven by a little bit of a different directive. And so I think all these voices at the table are really important. And it's like Halloween candy. Is it bad to have candy? Who doesn't want candy? But should you have a diet on candy? Probably not.
Probably not.
And so there's a system of checks and balances. And to understand personally, I'm making this decision right now. It's great. This isn't my entire like lifestyle. I'm not eating McDonald's 3 times a day because that's just not healthy for you. And your body's also a machine. So that's the fuel you're putting into your machine, like the fuel you're putting into your car. And every so often you need an oil change. And every so often you have to wash the fluids. And that's what food does to your body. But then thinking about the bigger impact of that when we live in such a delicate infrastructure here being Alaska, then somebody who's chosen this as a career and a craft and a directive, it's sort of my obligation to be able to educate people in feeling empowered to make some choices a little differently to support not only their bodies, but their community.
Well, and knowing those people, including myself, knowing that you can break that cycle, that you don't have to go to McDonald's, that you can go to the store. And whenever I look at, say the vegetable aisle, it's kind of daunting. I know that I'm going to get apples. I know that I'm going to get lettuce. I know that I'm going to get carrots, those types of things. But I also know that those are ingredients. I'll eat them individually, but I also know that they're ingredients. And that to me is kind of daunting to be like, what can I create with this?
So last summer I taught, and actually I did a little bit of this fall at Hutch, but which is the career center here in town. I teach just on beets because I am obsessed with beets, and it's one of Alaska's greatest harvests. Our beets are so sweet, and you're able to get them, and you're able to sustain and keep them through like in a cache or a root cellar all winter long. And people just are like, what do I do with a beet? You know, and right now I teach people how to make beet pasta, beet ice cream, beet ketchup, you know, and you get to infuse all of this flavor base and vitamin quality, support local economy, and you can still have your French fries. You're just having it with a beet ketchup, you know, and hopefully with an Alaskan potato. But that it's looking at the ingredient and not looking at it as like, this is a beet. You know, you can make a chip out of it. You can dehydrate it and grind it into a powder, and you can coat a piece of salmon with it. And it puts this great earthy, sugary flavor onto the salmon and bleeds that right into the flesh of the salmon. And it's all tying in that infrastructure. And it's legitimately dirt cheap. And it is so rich in iron and like so many different vitamin nutrients. And it's a crazy little bulb of a vegetable that a lot of people are like, I don't like beets. I'm like, oh, I don't think you know really what to do with the beet.
What got you on this beet path? What started it?
Well, they're gorgeous, and it's an easy harvest. I'm not going to lie. Like whatever you can get easy out of the Alaska ground, I'm like down for. I am not a struggled farmer. I'm an ease farmer, and beets are hardy. They you can use the greens, you can use the stalks, you can use the bulb. It's a whole vegetable thing that's got no waste, and it's easy to grow here. And they grow prolifically, and they grow large, and then they keep for the winter. And so. But I wasn't ever a big fan of beets. I don't like pickled beets, but a lot of people do. So I don't like beet juice, but a lot of people do. But I was like, this is something that I have a lot of. So what am I going to do with it? And you know, I just started like manipulating it. And it's really fun to teach people for something you can get for a quarter. You can make out of one beet, you know, 3 different meals or one meal of 3 different courses and ending with like a beet ice cream or a beet macaroon or something. And you can eat the entire vegetable.
Do you ever feel like you're fighting an uphill battle with beets because beets have this impression that they're for old people?
I think beets have an impression that they're for poor people.
Okay.
Like if you looked at my menu, I mean, I have white beans, I have chickpeas, I have, you know, and people are like, oh, I don't like that. Or I don't, you know, I don't know what all the associations are, but I'm not daunted by them at all. Like I will utilize what I have that represents the person and the education that I want to carry forward. And so no, I like when people challenge me when they say like, I don't like lamb. And I'm like, well, you don't really know that. Like, let me fix that for you. And I mean, a lot of people, and ridiculously, a lot of Alaskans don't like seafood because they've been plied with it their whole life. You know, they have, you know, year-old freezer salmon, and in home freezers, it's hard to keep salmon. Like, I mean, now everybody can like, you know, vac seal theirs and that, but like that wasn't the case 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. And so you would have like basically year-old freezer burnt salmon that people were making into like salmon pot pies and like, you know, at the end of the season to get through to the next season. And that salmon is so rich in omega-3s. It's so good for you. It's very healthy. It's like, it is a wonderful thing, but it tasted
fishy,
strong. And like, and a lot of people are put off it. And I was like, give me another chance. Let me like re-educate you on this. Mm-hmm. And one of my favorite things to do is work with only frozen salmon when it's out of season and do a side-by-side tasting of, you know, the 5 species of salmon with different dipping sauces, like a salmon sampler. Because, I mean, people don't traditionally tend to think, you know, dogfish is a fish that they would buy to eat, and what the different fat contents are in the salmon spectrum. And everybody likes king, silver, red, you know, but then mm-hmm. you go down the chain and people are like, no. and it's really fun to put it just like, and it's all frozen. So it doesn't have any factor of if it's in season or not in season, because mm-hmm. everybody has to be educated also on like how to utilize what's what they got and what's already in their freezer.
You know, one thing that I've always thought is kind of funny about people who eat fish, whether they like it or whether they're, just trying it, knowing that they don't like it, but testing it out, is that it always comes down to, is it fishy or not? And it's a fish. So of course it's going to taste like a fish, but it can taste either more fishy or less fishy.
Well, that's just in the fat content, the oil content, the harvest time, the storage, like a lot of things. But none of that's bad. I mean, and people take omega-3 pills like to get that fish oil back in them for some reason. But they're like, I don't like fish, but like I'll take the omega-3.
But they'll have like the fish burps.
You're like, oh, okay. So, and I mean, a lot of people don't like things texturally. My kid does not like mashed potatoes. He thinks they taste like, he describes it as an old person's foot.
How did he make that association?
I have no clue. Like he has a mind of his own. And, but I appreciate the fact that it's like a tactile thing for him, and he doesn't like soft food. He doesn't like polenta. He doesn't like, and it's really interesting in learning not just from my palate, but somebody that I'm so intimate with as my child, to watch him cultivate and grow his palate. And all of his friends have been in the restaurant with me cooking since they could stand. And so I know them. Like one of his friends, and it's so interesting, one of his friends has Greek heritage and he loves octopus. And none of the rest of the kids will eat the octopus. But every time, and now he's like 19, he brings dates into the restaurant, the rest of it, and they always order the octopus, which is, I find charming. And, but also it's like the evolution of a palate and just making sure you're giving people enough tools that they have enough education, and then they have enough built into how their body breaks down these things that they're, because if you haven't, that's the other thing too. And it's hard. You can't all of a sudden just go to a diet of like kale and chard and the rest of it if you haven't been eating like that, because your body is not used to processing that and it becomes difficult. And so then people are like, I'm just going to go get that bag of chips and sauce from the store or whatever, because I'm used to that. And that's what your body can break down. But your body's grabbing onto more harmful ingredients inside of it than healthful ingredients. And so you have to train your body like a machine, work out your stomach muscles, work out your intestinal muscles so that you're able to grab all the nutrients and process more like raw and like non-altered ingredients.
So there's this theory, I forget the name, but it says that people function better in their kind of original home of origin and eating that food.
So there's a lot of different concepts on that, but everybody has these diet fads. Like, I mean, it was like, oat bran was really big at one time and nobody talks about oat bran anymore. And, you had the Atkins diet and nobody talks about that anymore. And then you have the grapefruit diet of like the 80s where like everybody was like, oh, I'm on a grapefruit diet, or,
Does that mean you're just eating a grapefruit?
Basically, like, and so you're using all of that acidity to like break down the enzymes in your stomach to sort of do like a natural colonoscopy. But
I see. Okay.
But it's and then the cabbage diet, that was a big diet for a while, and everybody wants to grab onto a fad, but if you break down all those fads and put it into like a big, bigger picture, you're everybody's striving like for sort of that quick health break or that quick weight loss or that quick, going to give me more energy, going to, have better blood circulation and it's more about adapting. And everybody always says this, like adapting a lifestyle, but the diet you're referring to, they call the Viking diet.
Oh, okay.
And it's about eating where you're from. So if you are naturally like, Nordic as we are up here, you're a diet that's based more on foraging with small amounts of meat to supplement that. And, we also have like the value added of like sea kelp and sea lettuce and like looking at the different like benefits from eating from the ocean. But it's also, it's not convenient. Mm-hmm. And the reality of it is like life has to be convenient. We are so busy. We're going in a million directions. Not everybody wants to spend their day foraging, cooking, cleaning, all the rest of it. So how are you going to adapt these things into like a lifestyle that's just more acceptable and healthy. And that's the bridge. That's the conversation.
So my mom is very health conscious, and she told me this story about kind of a carnivore versus a vegetarian, someone who has more of a vegetarian diet, I should say. I don't think it was like a strict vegetarian.
It's a vegetable-based diet.
But you had these two cadavers kind of side by side in this analogy, and one was somebody who ate meat their entire life, like big steaks. The other one was somebody who focused more on vegetables. And in the meat eater, their stomach was kind of like pallid and sickly looking, their intestines, whereas the person that ate more vegetable-based diet, their stomach was like pink and kind of healthy looking. Not their stomach, but their intestines.
So I have multiple opinions on this, but
okay.
Any vegetables, if you do not know the source of where they're coming from, the amount of chemicals that have been dumped onto them or dumped into the ground because they are so rich in water, you are basically eating those chemicals into your body. And so if you're a vegetarian-based diet that is not actually really acknowledging where you're sourcing, like including legumes and everything from, that you are eating basically Roundup by the tablespoon. And
Roundup,
that's a fertilizer.
Okay.
That is used to like manipulate growth. And it is cancerous. And it is incredibly harmful. And so that you think you're doing great, I'm just going to have a salad. If you don't know where that salad came from, you're actually potentially putting more chemicals into your body than if you were just eating meat. That said, if you're eating a lot of, and regrettably, like in the more affordable cuts or low grade meat that you're not making choices on, you're also eating a ton of antibiotics that are really bad for your body as well. And so I don't know like where I land on that whole plant-based diet to meat-based diet. I think that everybody's body is incredibly different. And I think your body tells you what you need as far as nutrients, and you eat accordingly to that. Once you get away from just eating out of convenience or eating out of habit or any of the other things that go along with like dietary issues, but making wise choices to make sure that you're not ingesting unwanted and really unknown chemicals into your body. I mean, there's the whole genetically modified ingredient movement. There's the whole antibiotic movement in meat and the rest of that. But then we still have this big umbrella of infrastructure, with the food safety and the USDA and all the rest of it that we all have to operate under, which was built on trying to protect people from things like foodborne illnesses and all the things that can occur under that umbrella. But we've gotten so far in the other direction now that we're basically just taking chemicals into our body, and we're seeing that infrastructure happen in the breakdown of people like getting a whole rash of new cancers and a whole rash of like, as they age in life, like really foodborne related long-term illnesses because they've been ingesting harsh chemicals into their system that just builds up in there. You can't process it. And you didn't mean to. You don't know. And so there is something to be said of like 50 years ago where farm to table wasn't cool. It just what was. And that was what was affordable. I mean, with the age of, in the 1950s, it was way more impressive if you could have a TV dinner than if you made a dinner from like the farm or from the potatoes that you had or from a roast you got from your neighbor, that sort of thing. It seemed a lot more like you were making it in the world to do that. And we've gotten to that point now where we're generations deep into it, where our health is suffering from some of those choices.
From conveniency.
Yeah.
So to your point about biodiversity earlier, before my wife and I got married in 2017, I was like, okay, I want to lose some weight, before the wedding. And so I went like full vegetarian, and I felt like crap like the entire time. But then at the wedding, no, this was after the wedding, I had a steak, and I couldn't have felt it better. You know, I was like, I should have just been doing this the entire time. But
Your body was telling you needed iron.
That's what it was telling me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I should have listened to my body earlier.
Well, it's just, I mean, when you crave something, like in its like true form, like I just want a steak, your body wants that for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you eat something, even if you don't think you're like, wow, I feel really good about it. Like ginger is like just such like a brilliant, like antitoxin, like wash through your body. I juice maybe 50 pounds of ginger a week and infuse it into everything. But not everybody likes ginger that much, you know, because their body doesn't need it the way my body might need it, you know. And it's very interesting to learn that sort of nutritional process behind it. But like there isn't some blanket diet that works for everybody. There's not some blanket thing. You have to listen to your body, but then follow it with, you know, like an educated directive to how to like give your body like the premium fuel it needs to be the machine and feed your brain and, you know, and be able to be kind of the best person. And then the umbrella impact of it is that then you are able to create more jobs for your local economy, your society, more dollars that stay around you, support different people's dreams and infrastructures to be ranchers, fishermen, farmers, foragers, whatever. It's one of the biggest webs out there, but it comes down to every person understanding their wants, their desires, making their choices and making it's okay. Like, just like I said, it's okay to go to McDonald's, but know that you're making that choice. It's not like, oh my God, I have to. It's like, I want this right now. So I'm going to give myself this and I'm going to offset it with like, you know, something else later. Like I'll make myself a farm egg tomorrow morning instead. And maybe that craving will subside too.
So when you go to the grocery store, they say you should shop around the perimeter, right? Kind of around the canned foods. Have you heard about this?
No.
So like, I guess
I spend a lot of time in grocery stores, but go ahead.
So the perimeter, I guess, is where like Whole Foods are. But in that way, it seems like, you know, you have the lettuce, you have the carrots, you have the beets, you know, you have all that stuff that is a whole food. It just kind of grows from the ground. It's not processed. It seems like we're getting back to an earlier, like simple time of like eating, like you said earlier, where you had farm to table. That wasn't there. That way expression didn't exist because it was just how we ate.
But in this state, we would do farm, forage, fish, hunt, and put everything up for the winter.
Okay.
And so when you talk about canned foods or preserved foods, I would rather eat a canned tomato all winter long than buy a tomato because I know the journey of that tomato and that tomato doesn't value me in any capacity. But, you know, canned tomatoes, when tomato harvests come in, it's enormous. And that's what they do. And they put them up at the peak of the season and they eat. And so if you buy like a source of a canned product that you believe in, that is not like influenced by a wash of chemicals, that's actually probably a more nutritional product for you than buying, you know, your $4 beautiful looking, firm fleshed like tomato at the grocery store, where that came from nowhere near here. It had nothing to do with like anything. And like the transportation of it, the manipulation of that growth to make it still look pretty after 8 days on a truck up here and on a shelf at the grocery store in Fairbanks, it has nothing of value for you to eat. So there is that part of that educational process where it's a hybrid between the two.
Man, I'm learning a lot here. So canned food isn't bad for you.
No, I mean, food in general is what your body needs. It's a fuel. You need to eat. And so it isn't like bad or good. It's making those choices and understanding what those are, you know, and a lot of canned foods have a lot of sulfites in them. They have a lot of different added sugars and salts. And so you have to read labels and you have to just become a little bit more confident in what some of those decisions are. And then you have to alter your flavor palette a little bit to absorb some more of that intensity. I have a very good friend and she's a doctor. And she has like food sensitive / allergies to so many things. And she's tall and beautiful and skinny. And she'll eat something off of her dietary chart, and it looks like she has a bread baby in her belly. It's like an instant intestinal reaction. And I'm always like, why are you doing this? And she's like, well, it was convenient. And I was like, but it isn't convenient for your body. So let's like formulate this strategic plan, and let me help you with this, so that, because you do need convenience, you do need some quick goes and that sort of thing, but you have to also re-educate your mind where, you know, she might want a French fry, but she shouldn't have a French fry. She could have parsnip chips, you know, like create alternatives and then train yourself to eat those. Just like working out. Nobody likes to start working out. Working out is hard. It's time consuming. The first week or two, you're like, this is the worst. But then after that, you're like, oh my God, I feel so much better. I have so much energy. I can't believe I like quit doing this. And for whatever reason, like everybody lapses into those cycles of maintaining their personal machine. And people will take care of their cars well better than they'll take care of their bodies. But that's exactly what it is. Your body is a machine. And we need to like look at all aspects of that and how to create, you know, that better health for ourselves, because then we create a better mental self, and then we're able to be more productive and prominent in our daily lives.
So you mentioned sulfites. I have a question that doesn't really have anything to do with food. So I'm hoping you can answer it just for my own sake. So I read that you went to school in Paris.
I did pastry work in Paris. Actually, I'm certified as a pastry chef with the European Pastry Guild, which is a tough thing to get. And it was a hard and fun time.
So I've been to France twice. One back in April with my wife for a honeymoon, and the first time we went was in 2011, and we heard that one of the reasons that French wine in France you don't really get as bad of a hangover is because of the lack of sulfites in their wine. Is there any truth to that?
There's incredible truth to that. There is plenty of sulfites in their wine, but here in the United States, with our like very robust wine industry, there's a secondary fermentation where they introduce malolactic acids into it, which create a different sulfite base, which therefore they're able to stabilize, because in France, it's not a stabilized thing. So some years, some vintages might have a 7.5 alcohol content and some might have a 9.5 the same year. In the United States, based on a lot of different regulations, palate, marketing, the rest of it, we want to create like a vineyard brand where you're getting the same wine year after year after year, even though like growing conditions, fires, heat, you know, drought, whatever affects the vine itself, they manipulate it in the secondary fermentation to create a stabilized product so that people are product identifying versus like year identifying, vintage identifying, that sort of thing. And with that, they introduce a level that brings the sugars up and the sulfites to like a certain level that, you know, that it doesn't matter if you're having, you know, pick any wine, like from year to year to year, you're like, oh, I like that wine. You're not like, I like that year, you know?
Yeah.
And that's how they do it to create, I mean, if you look back to like the history in France of wine and food, and it tells a much more organic story than we tell in the States. When you go back to the 1950s in the States, like Blue Nun was the wine that people like associated with.
I've never even heard of that.
Well, there was a couple of, you know, you had your dry sack sherry, you know, like Julia Childs was famous for making sherry like on everybody's like cupboard shelves and that sort of thing. But we didn't have a wine industry. It's so new here. And the way that they approached it in the States was to craft brand identification, which would then make sure that your alcohol content, your sugar content, and your flavor profile was the same every year. And it didn't really have to affect what the natural conditions were of that year. And in France, the structure for how they make wine is very government stipulated, and it is not, it's letting in what they call the terroir, like the ground, speak to the wine.
Mhm.
And so you have a much different fluctuation with less manipulation. So yes, it's true.
So again,
Long and short.
we come back to conveniency.
Yeah, but there's nothing wrong with that either. I mean, it's understanding what some of those things are. And then if you get into wines, then you talk about the fact that we can't really get a lot of great French wines here because of the tariffs, and that becomes a governmental issue on taxes and international trade and the rest of it. But it's a conveniency that built into a marketplace that we have adapted to, that we expect. I mean, look at all the big guns in this world. Look at the Coke and Pepsi products. And again, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with these things, but I make a choice in my restaurants not to serve anything that has a commercial cornstarch in it.
Mhm.
And so we don't serve fountain sodas. We make all of our own sodas because I also think that there's value in the process and there's value in educating people on how to do that. But it's also, I like the people that make the choice to come all the way to where I'm cooking to not necessarily fall into the mold of convenience. And I think that those are choices that everybody gets to make, and I'm making them through my business.
That's great. So one thing that I wrote down here as you were talking about it was the cookbook you made for your grandfather, right?
Oh no, it was just
your dad.
It was my dad,
Your dad.
and it was just his birthday menu, and so I dedicated that entire weekend just to writing menus that brought me back to food memories of him. And so everybody that came and ate at my restaurant had to they didn't know my dad at all, but they got to know a little bit of my dad.
That's
through
great.
my eyes.
What was one of your favorite things on that menu?
I still have so many, and every day I build more food memories, but I share my food memories with people that work around me right now. So when I was a child and I went to Paris for the first time with my family, my dad and I would go out and I have 3 siblings, so there's 4 of us, and we're all vying for individual parent attention. And my parents were very good about trying to give us each individual time. But my dad and I would go out and we would go shop for the family for the meal for the day. We spent a couple months over in Europe as a child, and him and I on our way home would stop off at a little ice cream stand. But in Paris, they're teeny little, it's 2 tablespoon scoops. You get a little cone with it's not Americanized.
Yeah. American portions.
And I would always get the passion fruit sorbet. And I have never, that flavor profile has stuck with me my entire life as being a special time with my dad, but a special flavor. And I make that sorbet every day at both of my restaurants. And I incorporate passion fruit into a lot of things because it reminds me of that. And it's something that I think is really beautiful, but it's also something that a lot of people have not even tasted. And even this year, my family does Thanksgiving together every year. And there's 12 of us that gather. And every night, one of the children takes a meal. And so at the end of my meal, I just served passion fruits cut in half with sugar on them. And it shocked me that most of my family had never eaten a passion fruit raw. They didn't even know what it looked like. They didn't even know what it was.
I can't even think of a passion fruit right now.
I was like, oh my God, this is one of the flavor profiles that I grew up with in my childhood that drove me to all of these different decisions in adulthood. And I'm sharing this with my family, which I've been with since I was born. And they're like, we've never had a passion fruit before. I was like, what? So yeah, I mean, it's real interesting. I mean, for me, and there's all of those surprises that happen all the time. But I think when I think back to the biggest education that my dad, both of my parents, but certainly my dad was an influencer with me on this, was to when you find something that you learn more about it. Keep using that as a narrative to give you interest and education and move forward. And I think that, I mean, my parents were horrible gardeners, but they always had this little backyard garden, and they would fight to get a tomato every year from the slugs or whatever else that was going on. And I just remember it being, we grew up having lobster races where they would go to the market and get lobsters, and then we would race them across the yard as children. And then
before you cooked them?
Yes. And there was this big breakdown into them. You're eating that lobster. I mean, both of my sisters are vegetarians. My brother's a big meat eater. Like everybody's got their little, my dad, I didn't know this until like a couple years ago. He has never eaten an egg yolk.
How does that happen?
He only eats scrambled eggs or omelets. I made him eggs Benedict for Christmas breakfast, and he's like, I don't eat egg yolks. I was like, what? But everybody has their little food things, and it's so interesting as you learn them. That web, that history, that fiber becomes like a different storyline. And I think that the biggest thing that my dad gave me, and both my parents gave me, as growing up, because they did a lot of cooking. We were the family that had like brought banana bread and cream cheese sandwiches to school. We were the like kids that had ratatouille and clams on a Friday night, not pizza, and we resented it. We were a bunch of skinny kids because we wouldn't eat the food. We were like, oh, but we wanted cheeseburgers. We wanted things that we didn't get a lot of, and those became treats, and those became choices, and those became things that as we all became adults we understand as indulgences in our diet. But they really told us to just taste, to try, to develop, to grow, and to gather experiences through food.
So you mentioned that everyone has a food thing. Do you have a food thing?
Oh God, I have a ton of food things. I for whatever reason, everybody thinks sea urchin is so phenomenal. I do not like sea urchin in any capacity. I don't like breaking them open. I don't like scooping them out. I don't like the flavor profile of them. People put them on menus and it's like, oh, the urchin. It's like, no, not for me. I also though like taking the challenge of like, there's a lot of things that I don't particularly like. Like I'm not a big fan of radishes. The radish family is enormous. And I mean, I actually do like black radishes. I like daikon a lot, but like the traditional, red, purple, white, small little bulb, Julie, they're beautiful, but I don't really like eating them. And they're easy to grow here. And I grow a bunch of them. And I had to challenge myself to be like, how am I going to get behind this to put this on my menu? And I do a fried radish salad right now with this rich Marcona almond dressing and orange oil and basil. And it's phenomenal. And it's not fried in a batter. It's just pan fried in olive oil. So it gets like crisp on the outside. And I put a little bit of sugar to take a little bit of the edge off of the radish and get better caramelization. And I love taking up the challenge. Like, this is what you have. This is what's growing here right now. You might not personally like it. Change the storyline. So
I mentioned having traveled throughout Europe in 2011. And when we were there, we spent some time in Greece. And before we got to Greece, I would always ask people in the different countries that we were visiting, what's one thing that I need to do or I need to eat or I need, and everybody invariably said, eat the tomatoes in Greece. You have to.
Oh yeah.
And it was crazy. We went to, I think 11 countries. And like I said, everybody said, eat the tomatoes in Greece. So we went there and it was the first thing I did. I had to eat these tomatoes because everyone kept telling me to eat tomatoes. And they tasted so much different, so much sweeter than any tomato I've ever had in my entire life that it has stayed with me since, to the point where I did a little bit of research. Like, why are their tomatoes so much different than the tomatoes that I grew up with here in the United States? And I came upon this article that said that there are so many different strains of tomatoes.
Oh, yeah.
But we in the United States have only really picked out one strain, and we've kind of populated all the grocery stores with this one strain. So that's how we understand tomatoes.
We've also manipulated the ground that it's not able to grow a lot of these. And then you go back into like the same thing. Tomatoes and apples are probably the two biggest conversations of like the most common fruit and vegetables that people eat that have been so manipulated by our marketplace. And then you go back to like heritage tomatoes, heirloom tomatoes, heritage apples, and within those two varietals, there is easily hundreds of strains but that they're not grown commercially and they're not manufactured, mostly based on shipping and shipping quality of how they're able to harvest early. They're able to bring up to color and ripeness in manipulated facilities, and that they're able to ship them on bumpy trucks, on off roads, on planes, whatever, without bruising or losing the infrastructure of the actual tomato. You talk about things, and I mean, you're from here, so I mean, talk about the blueberry.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about an Alaskan blueberry to a commercial blueberry in the lower 48, and it's a horse of a different color, basically from the Wizard of Oz. It's like our carrots. I mean, such a basic thing, an Alaskan carrot, because we have the 24 hours of photosynthesis here, that the sugars come to the surface before the fiber actually gets to grow. So our carrots are richer in antioxidants, in vitamin C and vitamin D, but in sugar, that they're like, it's like nature's candy. It's dirt candy in essence. And you grab a carrot from the lower 48 and it tastes like a horse carrot. It's just so fibrous and you don't have any of that vibrancy. And that's the thing with the Grecian tomatoes. And that's why I said also, when you shop for tomatoes in the winter, look for, they can and process, they come up to season real fast and then they can and process them all. And you can find, and that tomato is going to taste better and be better for you as a canned product than a fresh product. They sell them.
That's awesome. Okay, so switching gears a little bit here.
Mm-hmm.
I did some internet research on you, and I read that you graduated with a degree in mental health and social work.
Mm-hmm.
I have two questions about that. So one, what motivated you to pursue a degree in mental health and social work?
I grew up in Detroit, and I grew up in a fairly affluent family with a lot of resources, and I could see the juxtaposition of like that city infrastructure. I also grew up with a family that placed a lot of value, energy and time on service and servitude and understanding really like what that meant in I can't thank my parents enough for that. So going into college, you have all of these different emotions and all of these different thoughts. And, and I was classically misdirected and don't know what I want to do, but I knew I wanted to contribute. I knew I was a lucky one. I knew I had something, and it was of my obligation to try and give back. And so that's what drove me into social work and mental health. I was actually going for poli-sci because I thought political science and politics were really interesting and diverse and helped create and sculpt the landscape. But it turned out after like hopping around colleges and 6 years that the degree I was closest to was mental health and social work. So I just finished up with that. I worked in the field very briefly and had some real rough experiences, and also realized like it's pretty easy as an indulged white girl growing up, in a very diverse community to think, oh, I can save the world. And once you get actually into the brass tacks of it, it's pretty gritty. It's pretty hard. And it was a little too much for me. And basically I ran away to Alaska and kind of licked my wounds and healed myself here. And that's where I fell into kitchen work. And the two actually overlap quite a bit.
And I want to get to that question, but I have one question that I just thought of before that is, if you don't mind, what were those situations that kind of turn you off on social work?
I was very prideful, and I was doing foster care home assessments at the time. And there's a very firm structure that you have to follow with that. And you always go with a partner, and basically you just have a checklist that you have to like do a home assessment. There's no personal evaluation in it whatsoever. You got this list, you just go to the house, you check it all off, you turn it in. And it was a late Friday afternoon, and my partner that I was doing assessments with all day had a concert he wanted to go to, and I was like, I got this last one, and they had to be submitted for court dates the next week, and I just felt overconfident in a situation, and I didn't realize the full impact of when you go into somebody's house and you're looking at their situation and you're filling out your checklist, that you're talking about valuing or not valuing whether or not they can keep their child. And this is back in the early 90s, and crack was king in Detroit, and there was a lot of, and I got really hurt, and I was thankful that I wasn't raped. And I woke up in a hospital, and
you were attacked.
Yeah, but it was a situation that culminated out of a lot of, in hindsight, I don't feel like I was the victim. I feel like I brought some of this on to myself. Like, it was, I broke rules of like two people going into a visit. I was a male, female. I was, a 21-year-old white girl in the inner city of Detroit assessing whether or not somebody could keep their kid. And we see all the time on the streets here, everywhere you go, when people are affected by drugs, they're not operating in like a conscientious state of mind. And it was a situation that escalated really quickly. And I kind of brought myself to that doorstep. And it caused me great mental anguish at the time. And I had the opportunity to retreat into Denali National Park and take a job at a lodge and sort of lick my wounds and reassess without the infrastructure of such an urban environment that I clearly thought I was bigger than or better for or whatever. I mean, I had a lot of ego, and yeah, the situation wasn't good and the end result wasn't good, but everybody's got their stories. Everybody's got their struggles. And I was not prepared to do that job. And I have a massive amount of respect for people that can. And that is like why I'm so dedicated to, trying to help facilitate the crew at Beans Cafe in any way possible. I couldn't do their job every day. I couldn't face those like variables every day and feel successful. And but I have huge admiration for people that can.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's an unbelievably tough job.
Yeah. And you can't read into it any differently. It took me a long time to feel comfortable going back to Detroit, actually. And I now do work with the youth boxing gym there. I do a lot of things back in Detroit for fundraiser projects. And I really feel connected with that city. I still have friends that work in social work there, 25 years later, that are still fighting the fight and doing all the good things. And I'm so proud of them. But that wasn't my trajectory. I was a little too self-influenced to really read the room correctly.
So the second part of that question, I think kind of dovetails that is, in your experience, is there an overlap in what you learned in college about people and what you've learned about people as a chef?
Every day, all the time. And, kitchens are kind of that like breeding ground. In Denali, it's one thing because it's a lot more removed. It's a lot more rural. But coming to Anchorage this year and trying to cultivate a team and hire people, everybody's got backstories. A lot of people have been to prison. A lot of people are like drug addicts that are trying to get over it. A lot of people have dark skeletons in their closet. And I want to create an environment and an atmosphere that's open, but that's also like in that nurturing aspect where people feel they can leave all those demons at the door and be proud of what they're doing and then like eat healthier. And it's so visceral and it's so day to day. And hopefully those day to day create a long-term impact. But it makes me a better chef. It makes me a better kitchen manager. It makes me a better boss. And it makes me like a better visionary to work with other people.
So earlier you said that you kind of escaped to Denali from Detroit.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like Denali gave you a second life, like a different path?
Well, I mean, I was a child. Like, you know, anybody in their early 20s, like that's what that time is for.
Absolutely,
You grow up in a household, you're cultivated by, you know, different people's, your family, your parents, your teachers, all of those different influences, and you're like learning, grabbing, growing. And then you get thrown into college and you are like, okay, I'm going to try and figure out what I like. What's the music I really like? How do I really like to dress? Like, you know, what are my, like, am I a morning person? Am I a night person?
Mm-hmm.
You know, you just start figuring all of these things out. And I wasn't familiar with wild, natural, big spaces. And I don't think I knew how much I needed some of that to breathe deeper in my own skin to help me grow and figure out who I was. And so I think that it was just the process of it all and what it gave to me and continues to give to me is what helps, you know, define the fiber of who I am.
Do you ever look at that situation back in Detroit and draw strength from it? I mean, you said that you were scared of Detroit, kind of going back there, but now, you know, you're working with the boxing organization.
Yeah, Books for Boxing. It's a great little youth gym that combines tutorials and free educational and career advice. And then while you get that, then you earn boxing time. And so it's a great program. But I think that also is like a level of maturity in who I was and how I viewed the situation, and really coming to terms with the fact that, I mean, and when I tell the story and people naturally like lead to like, oh, you were victimized or you were attacked. It was a situation that happened that I put myself in, and I was also in the wrong. You know, like, I mean, it's hard to say that, but like, I shouldn't have gone into that situation and broken the rules of the organization without going in there with a partner, without like signing in before I went in, without, I mean, there was a lot of things that I didn't take the risks into accountability at the time. And it took me a long time, I guess, to let go of the fact that I brought some of that on myself. And to be able to be like, okay, you know, don't be so ego-driven. Read the room. Take care of yourself. You have value. So. You
know, I don't know if I'm so there's this theme that's kind of been following me this week, and it happened initially, with two of my friends, one that I podcasted with yesterday, and he's looking at all of this old footage of himself because he's putting together this documentary. And he was talking about watching old footage of himself, right? And he's like, yeah, man, he's like, I think I might have been kind of a jerk. I don't really like my younger self. And my friend Tim, who's a teacher here in Anchorage, is like ironically doing a very similar thing where he's looking at old footage, and he said pretty much the exact same thing to me. Is he said he looked at footage of his younger self, and he's like, I don't think I like my younger self. It's really difficult for me to look at that footage and hear, you know, the things that I'm saying and how, you know, pompous I am or whatever. And to both of them, I said to Tim, I was like, Tim, you need to be nicer to young Tim. And to Micah, I was like, you need to be nicer to young Micah, because young Micah and young Tim they didn't have the experiences that you have now.
Oh, sure. Yeah. No, I mean, I have a 16-year-old. I'm watching him evolve into a brilliant and exceptional young man. And I am allowing him every grace and dignity to sometimes legitimately be a dick and misuse and misrepresent words and global view and the rest of it, and try and create moorings for him to navigate without letting him be driven just by my mission or his dad's mission or that sort of thing. And it's wild. youthful exuberance. Those are words that happen all the time, and pridefulness, and that's part of growing up. I don't deny myself any of these things. I just think it's all in this. I don't ever want to be done growing and learning.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want ever to be done like meeting new people and creating like a deeper and bigger. It's such a gift. Life is such a gift. And I want to contribute this summer. And albeit I've been in Denali for 25 years. This is the first summer I've been in Anchorage. There was somebody who was passed out on the middle of the street on like Tudor or something like that. It was like in the middle of like a 4-lane like intersection. And there was like this homeless little embankment on the corner there. And I pulled over and somebody came over, one of the other people that I'm assuming are homeless. I don't know that. That's an assumption on my part. But they were, standing on the corner, came over and I'm rolling this person over. And I was like, we have to get him out of the street, And they're like, well, with the funding cuts, he lost his medication. He went off it for like 2 weeks. And then Medicare came back online this summer. And then he got his medication. And so he probably took too much of it or his system didn't. And, and obviously, he was very intoxicated and I don't know what substances or whatever. And so then I like asked a bunch of these people to help me like bring him over to the sideline. So at least he could lay down. And I'm talking to people about making sure that, his airways are cleared. I'm like pinching him. I'm taking his temperature. I'm trying to get him to sit up. I'm trying to get him to sip water at this point in time. And I have a friend in the car with me and she wouldn't get out of the car. She's like, you don't know what you're doing. You're inviting craziness to the doorstep yet again. And it's like, this is a society we live in. Like, this is what you do. And so then I went and I got everybody like a meal and more water and some Burt's Bees wipes and stuff like that. And then I just went and hang out with them for 2 hours and I listened to their stories of what they were talking about and how like you just listen to them.
In this camp or in this
just
area?
On the side of the road where there was like 8 people that were hanging out. And
you brought them food?
Yeah, of course.
Because you had food in your car?
No, I went and got food.
Oh, you went and got food, came back?
Yeah.
Wow.
But it's because it's a society.
Yeah.
This is what you do. And I wanted to make sure that this guy was at least not going to choke on his own vomit or sit up. I didn't want to call the police. They have enough to deal with. And I'm not like, I'm a part of this community. I don't think of myself in any other capacity, but that's what you do. And they had such interesting stories and such interesting things to say about this. Was right after like the government shut down for the state and all the budget cuts happened and all, like Francis Home, like all these places lost beds. There was, and what their like take on it was because it was affecting their actual day-to-day lives. And the way they told the story about how this person Medicaid got cut and then it got reinstated. And like, this was like an adverse affection to the like medication that he had to take for his heart. And I don't know a lot about native health or the rest of it. And it just gave me the opportunity. And they were like, who are you? And I'm like, I'm just a person. Like, and there's something fundamentally that I believe in, like creating society and creating that. And everybody has a role to play in it. I have the opportunity and the love to do it through food. But at the same time, I worry about all these people when you drive by and they're asking for money on corners or whatever, like they don't have enough water and how are they staying clean? Like basic things. And so I travel around with stuff in my car to always be able to pull over. And I understand giving money is not the effect and it helps sometimes create more problems or that sort of thing. But if you give somebody, some cookies and some water and some, sanitizing wipes, it's something they'll use and something that they'll need. And I think that if we looked at our surroundings with a little more humanity, that will create a different tomorrow.
How often do you do something like that?
All the time.
All the time. Do you remember the first time you did it?
I growing up, I grew up with that like thoughtfulness of servitude and the thoughtfulness of trying to be aware of the situation. And I spent time working with the Jesuit Volunteer Corps. I spent time doing trips into like very crazy inner city situations in Houston and Chicago, just doing like Habitat for Humanity stuff or that sort of thing. And And I think that those big organizations are great, like lighthouses for people to grab some more perspective. But then I think it's the day to day. And now living here in Anchorage and working in a kitchen and creating a kitchen in Anchorage, I mean, I hire a lot of people that are right on that edge, and one day could shift between they're on this side of the fence or that side of the fence. And just to bring that, any extra food that we have, we always bring my dishwashers. I'll take it with them, and they stop by all these street corners where they know people congregate, and just bring them food. And I like people around me that are at least thinking along those lines, like, and understanding I'm not a big mover and changer. I'm not going to affect, but I want to live in a society where you've got your hand held out versus closed up.
What do you think it is about kitchens that attract a certain type of person?
They're warm. They're nurturing. You get to instant satisfaction by making something fantastic, like just as simple as a chocolate chip cookie, and comes out of the oven and the whole kitchen smells like chocolate chip cookies, and somebody gets to walk through and grab one. And the joy it brings them for just a few minutes is more joy than most people get to bring to somebody like in a day. And you get to do that consistently over and over again. On the flip side, you get judged all the time, and you misstep, and sometimes you overcook things, or sometimes things burned, or something. It's not all like rainbows and unicorns, but it's those moments where, for me, and that ties back to the social work, mental health side of it. Like, I get to create and give something that's going to instantly give somebody pleasure or fulfillment or nourishment. And I don't have to think about the huge, big picture. It's just an instant transaction. And it makes me feel pretty good.
That's great. I've always wondered that. I've listened to Anthony Bourdain's Kitchen Confidential book, and I don't really watch reality television at all, but I've seen clips, of who's the guy that yells all the time?
Gordon Ramsay.
There we go.
And he's
yeah.
actually really delightful.
I've heard that. But they seem like very honest places, kitchens. And by way of that, I guess they attract people. You said nurturing, right? So they're nurturing, they're honest, they're harsh. It's, to me, that all kind of wraps up into they're a little bit more real than, like, say, your cubicle job.
It attracts a certain kind of personality, for sure. And within that personality, it's fun to watch it play out. I mean, like I said earlier, I'm 47 years old. I work with a lot of people that are in their 20s and early 30s, and a lot of boys. Kitchens are traditionally male-dominated atmospheres. And, and I get hushed by my servers all the time for, like, I swear like a sailor, and I yell like no.
You haven't swore once in this podcast.
I've been working really hard not to. But I promised my mom I would try and clean that up. But it's really but it's also like genuine fun, and there's a certain amount of, like, let's not take ourselves too seriously, but let's try and be excellent all the time. And it breeds an energy and a vibe that not everybody enjoys, but it certainly speaks to a lot of personalities, and it's what resonates in my soul. And so it's really nice to be able to kind of carry that through and hang out with a bunch of people that I think are culinary gangsters.
Culinary gangsters. Is that the name of your memoir?
No. A memoir. That would involve a lot.
A lot of swearing.
A lot of swearing. Yeah. I'm trying to work on that. I do say things like, and apparently they can, in my dining room up north, there's so much break between the kitchen and the dining room that people can't hear me when I yell. The dining room here at the museum too, and that's the Anchorage Museum. Like, nobody, I was telling somebody to get their head out of their ass the other day and stop fucking the kitchen. And and apparently you could hear it all the way through the dining room. And I was like, noted. It's just like,
so you just have to whisper next time.
Yeah, I'm not good at that. I mean, when you're standing there too, you don't realize how loud you're getting because you're under hoods, and like the oven doors are opening and closing, timers are going off, gas is turning on and off. You're not even saying it out of like real anger. You know, you're just like, what the is going on? And like, it's just in that, it's just a transaction, but it's not probably for everybody's that's been like having a great afternoon at the museum with the docent and looking at the great exhibits of the North. Really want to walk in and be like, get your head out of your effing ass. Like, probably not. So yeah, it's a work in progress. That's what I like to say about all of us all the time. We're a work in progress.
So I wrote these down. I know we're kind of going long here, and I hope I'm not keeping you from anything.
Okay.
But
and they're great. I don't have my phone on me anyhow. So.
Okay. I just have like maybe one more line of questioning and then one more question.
Okay, go.
You've been great, by the way. This has been amazing, super educational. So how does Top Chef fit into all this? You being a contestant on that show.
Okay, well, truth be told about Top Chef, my son and I watched that show religiously, and it's so much fun, and I still watch back episodes of it. I was going through the start of a divorce, and it was February, and it was, you know, darkness, winter, Denali, you know, basically I was, you know, day drinking red wine, watching New Girl in between having the restaurant open in the evenings.
New Girl's great.
And they called me, and it was a cold call. I had never auditioned. I had not done any like spec stuff. I had never reached out. I thought it was a prank call, to tell you the truth. I thought my staff were like, oh, we got her now. We're going to say we're calling from Top Chef, but it was actually Top Chef calling. So the next week they flew me out to do a screen test. And then the next week, a week after that, they cast me. And I never did any of that preliminary, like, oh, here's my video footage and here's me in a kitchen, like any of those clips that you see sometimes on those shows. I never did. And then I, in hindsight, really should have read the contract a little bit better, because I didn't realize it was going to involve so much separation from my kid. And
and how long was that separation?
A 7-week shoot.
Okay.
And it's total isolation. You don't have access to, like, outside of screen time where they let you call on the producer's phone and they film you with it. You don't have any access to your life. You don't have computers. You don't have phones. You're not allowed to read books. You're completely encapsulated into the house, and you're not allowed to talk to people. You're not, like, it's a very structured environment at that point in time. And that's the way they run the show. And they were very transparent about it. I just didn't, because it wasn't ever anything I thought about or desired to participate in. And then all of a sudden this opportunity, and I'm like, oh, I'd be foolish not to take this opportunity. This is amazing. I'm doing this. And then, and a lot of people, you know, they work with other top chefs. They train for the show. Anyhow. So I ended up going on the show, and I went on the show with the intention of that this was going to be the biggest opportunity for me to create like a culinary family that I didn't have in the interior, because I never worked under anybody. I never trained under anybody. I don't have a bunch of chef friends that we're all collaborating ideas on or that sort of thing. Yeah. And I walked away from that experience, you know, with 14 of the best friends I could ever ask for, and learned so much. And we still talk almost every day, all of us. And and even though I didn't do really well on the show, because also I'm not comfortable on TV, there was a variety of experiences that made that a very difficult challenge for me. But it was also the best and biggest, boldest move I've done in my life. And I walked away with it with the best takeaway. And I would encourage anybody, anytime when opportunity knocks on your door, take it, because you don't know where that's going to lead you. And it's made me a better chef. It's made me have better connections. And it gave me 14 of the best chef friends I could ever ask for.
That's great. So being a part of a contest like that, competing against other great chefs, I would imagine the level of energy and progression is pretty wild, pretty high. Did you have any personal breakthroughs that you still draw strength and experience from?
Oh, on a daily basis. I mean, we could talk to each other all the time. I'm like, is salmon ice cream too much to push for? They're like, Laura. And, I mean, it's like, and then on an emotional level, like I'm having a really bad day, and like Chris will call me from Brooklyn and he'll be like, I got you, sister. Like, you know, and then just thinking about different cuisines from, you know, like understanding scrapple and applying that to like some of my reindeer offal and trying to like create a dish out of that translates we do collaboration dinners. I had Tanya up from San Francisco, and she runs Brown Sugar Kitchen, and she is a very influential African-American cook that does like very Southern style cuisine. And we did like, you know, sort of this coast to coast thing where we brought Southern cuisine with Alaska seafood and reindeer. And we created like a gumbo with reindeer. And we did this great menu. And it happens all the time. I mean, I continue to grow and take away from that experience on a daily basis. And I'm super thankful for it. On the show, the biggest thing was when you got eliminated, you went to the elimination house. You weren't allowed to leave the set. You had to stay on set the whole time. And so every basically 2 days, somebody else got eliminated. And it was but we still had to participate in all the challenges that were public, because where they were filmed, people couldn't know who was on the show and not on the show, because the show is filmed 6 months before it airs.
Oh, okay.
And so you're doing it then just for growth. And it was like going to the best culinary summer camp ever. You get access to all these ingredients. Like you don't have to, everything is paid for, you know, like, and you can really work with your peers and push the envelope and challenge different like recipe concepts. And it ends up being the coolest thing ever. I always thought they should film like the B-side, like here's the show. And then here's like, you know, the B-side of the album.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
The Lim House. And I always thought that would be because we really, I mean, and that's where those friendships and that's where those like, because you're no longer competing against each other. You're there at that point in time just to collaborate and grow and have fun and learn about each other. And it was like those weeks were the coolest weeks ever for me.
That's really cool to hear that you created genuine friendships out of that situation because, like I said, I don't watch reality television, but the reality television that I have watched, if it's contest based, it seems very cutthroat and people can seem very mean to each other.
Reality television, though, is just like that. It's reality television. Every single person on every single show has somebody who's producing them, and they're manipulating the story, or they're choosing whatever clips they want to take to create a different narrative for you, and whatever narrative they want to make. You know, somebody's got to be a villain, somebody's got to be the angel, somebody's got to be the good person. They spin your narrative to what works to sell the show, and all of it is real. But on a daily basis, there's times where you're like angry at somebody, and then you're apologetic towards them, or you're, you know. And they are able to edit those moments together to draft a narrative that might not be representative of the person who's actually engaged in that situation.
Was it a little weird being a part of the show and seeing the actual reality of it, and then watching the show and you're like, oh, okay. Like
I never watched the show.
Oh, you never did?
Yeah, no. But in the day-to-day basis, having a mic pack on you and having cameras on you 16 hours a day, and living in a dormitory style household with, you know, adult strangers, feeling very like a fish out of water. I mean, I came from Denali National Park, and I didn't, all of these people had worked for Charlie Trotter, people had worked for Marcus Samuelson, people had, you know, I mean, at that point in time, I had 3 James Beard nominations, you know, and now I have 4, but I'd never been on that circle, and everybody was like, you know, peacock feathers were out. Everybody's trying to like, oh, I'm like the king of pasta over here. Oh, I do this over here. Oh yeah, I saw you at this event, and I didn't have any of that like repertoire conversational like standpoint. And it was really isolating, and it took a while to sort of not be afraid.
I mentioned that I listened to the audiobook of Kitchen Confidential, and there's a chapter where Anthony Bourdain explains his chef toolkit, which included a good chef's knife, an offset serrated knife, a heavyweight pan, those types of things. What does your toolkit look like?
That's so interesting, because actually I have had the indulgence and luxury of just working out of a kitchen that's entirely mine and crafting like basically an entire workshop of stuff that's just mine. Going on Top Chef, you're allowed to bring 8 tools with you and nothing else. And so it became really important to start to pick out what those tools were, because I have never had to edit down to that capacity. And I think that also like taught me a lot, even in that packing process. And I think that a really good chef's knife, a good spatula, a set of fish tweezers is really important to have, a flexible boning knife, at least one, if not two spoons. Spoons are really the backbone of a lot of things. You can use them as a ladle, you can plate with them, you can use them as a spatula, that sort of thing. Kitchen tongs are definitely like a must for me. And that would be about it. You don't need, 29 knives. You don't need, like a boning knife, a really good chef's knife, paring knives for like berries and pastry, but spoon, spatula, fish tweezers in Alaska, a must. Like if you got to pull pin bones, you got to be able to do it fast, and yeah, that would about sum it up for sure.
How about some brands that you swear by?
I think that's a very personal thing, like people's clothing choice and I think that keeping your stuff tight is what's really important. Making sure that your edges of your tweezers, I sandpaper them to be able to like make sure I'm keeping that edge to pull pin bones without breaking the flesh. Keeping your knives sharp. I use Japanese steel because it's easier to keep sharp, but you have to sharpen it more frequently. I do not like any knife that has a butt on it because I like to have a clean blade all the way through to do like longer fillet work or that sort of thing. But I think that people know where they feel comfortable with their grip, their hand. It's just the same thing as like, do you wear Converse or Vans? Like it's a personal choice. And I don't really feel that that's something that you can like solicit. What I don't like is when people try and brand shop or have knife kits or anything like that, especially. And it's so fun to see in culinary students because they're so excited about their knife kits, but it's all one brand. And so like one brand can't fulfill all of your, like, it's like saying there's only one kind of food, And, I think that if you talk to, like, I have mad respect for like really good butchers, whole animal slaughtery, that sort of thing, even from like, the slaughterhouse where you're just like gutting and eviscerating the animal, like as fast as you can do that. Those people are working with, basically $20, $25 knives that are sharp as F. And like, that's like a brilliant thing, and watching and being a part of that, I think that it's not necessarily, steel and dollars, it all equates at some point in time, but that it's, I think it's as utilized tools are the best tools.
Okay. That's awesome. That does it for all my questions.
Good.
Do you have anything else you'd like to add?
No, it's cool to talk to you.
Yeah. Thank you for being on the show.
All right. Thanks for having me.
For more information about how you can support local grassroots journalism, go to www.patreon.com/Crude Magazine. Crude Conversations is written, hosted, and produced by me, Cody Liska, for Crude Magazine. Music was produced by Beets.